Okay, we've got a couple of people in already. Greetings, live viewers, and welcome to Saroth the Mage. Tonight I've got a fantastic live guest. Oh, better mute that. My friend John Cronin from Hermetic Principles. He's been studying the Kybalion for 35 years. So we're going to get a really good conversation tonight about a quite neglected and oft abused text, I feel. So without further ado, if I can find my gavel, I would give you a bong. Ah, yes, here we go. So I think 3 for luck tonight. And welcome, Hermetic Principles. How goes tonight, sir?
It's going great, thanks. And thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and to talk about what for me is probably the most interesting topic that I can ever think about. The Kybalion, it's really interesting material, I think, for anyone on a spiritual path and anyone trying to really understand themselves or understand the world around them a little bit better. And as you said, I've been at this for a long time. Just to give a little bit of background, so you know how I got along to it. I grew up in the U.S. in a kind of interesting city called Salem, Massachusetts, and it's kind of famous for, or infamous for, the Salem witch trials.
Trials, indeed.
Yes, 1692, killed about or murdered about 20 people. But, you know, out of everything bad comes something good. And today, Salem has become kind of a witchcraft and metaphysical mecca. And growing up there, I was exposed to kind of a lot of interesting ideas. And as a kid, I had some doubts, trying to figure out some things that were going on in my life and trying to give some meaning to them. And one day I met a very wise old witch, and she told me about a book. And she said this book has the answers to the universe, how the universe works. And I kind of didn't believe it. And she held up the book, just a small little book, and said, it's all in here. And I read it, and I read it again and again, and I get the information. So I said, I want to read that book. And I read it, and I understood some of it. And then I read it again and again and again and again. And I've read it every single year since way back when. And kind of like an onion, you peel away the layers and you get to a deeper and deeper understanding. And at this point in the game, I've gotten a pretty good perspective on it. And I don't get tired of it. And I think the more you get into it, the more there is to get into. And it's a fantastic work. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about it today.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I had kind of stayed away from it because, as we've talked about, there's this purist kind of grimoire scene that seems to be the height of fashion in occultism at the moment. And because it's been attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, but it's, you know, it was published in, I think, 1910 or 1908. A lot of people really write it off as, oh, it's just new thought. Or so what are your feelings on the way that the Kybalion has been pretty neglected and a bit abused lately, I feel?
I agree. I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding. Talking about Hermetic and the original Hermetic text. Yes, it was published about 100 years ago. And it is part of the New Thought movement in a way, but the material that it contains goes much beyond that and much prior to that too. You know, the word Hermetic, I think a lot of people kind of get caught up about. You have the original Hermetic body of work, and it's not part of that. It was put out about 100 years ago. But what the principles communicate are universal truths, and those go far beyond 100 years ago and even 1,000 years ago. And I think it's very interesting that the first sentence in the book says, the lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding. And I think a lot of people just kind of read the book superficially, a little quickly, and say, yeah, I know that. And that's not part of the Hermetic doctrine or work, and just disconsider it. You know, for me, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Someone said that before. So if you call it Hermetic wisdom or New Age wisdom or whatever wisdom, it doesn't matter. It's still very, very solid material that even people on the very traditional Hermetic path can get a lot out of, as well as everyone else.
Well, I certainly think so. I've been immersed in it since we first spoke, actually, and it's kind of at first it's almost like a sort of Zen riddles. The all is in the all, but the all, all that kind of stuff. But I think the more I've been kind of thinking about it and almost meditating on it, it's really been very profound. It's based on like really 7 principles. So would you like to like kind of talk us through maybe a principle at a time, or just however you want to do it? Just go for it, man.
Sure. It's interesting. Different people kind of present it in different ways and try and put different attributes to it, because 7's really symbolic. Well, each one corresponds to one of the colors, 7 colors, one of the planets, one of the chakras. Excuse me, that's fine. The way I look at it, the first principle, that's really what you want to get. If you remember nothing else from this live, what you want to remember is the very first principle that says, everything in the universe comes from mind. And that's really, either you get it or you don't. The first principle states the all is mind and the universe is mental. And what does that mean? The all is mind. If you have to give a name, okay. Another topic that kind of is a little bit out of fashion is the topic of God. Let's use that as a word for a minute, okay? God is a really, whether you're atheist or theist or whatever, wherever you are on the spectrum, that word is a very biased word. If I say the word God, I'm going to have a very different opinion than you do or someone else does. So it's really inadequate to use that word. It doesn't really communicate a clear idea. So the word all communicates that everything that exists, everything in the physical world, everything in the non-physical world, everything you can imagine, and everything you can't imagine, all, everything is mind. We have the human world, and you have human minds, and we have the universe. And the idea is it's like a universal mind. And the universe is actually mind. That's at the essence of it. We tend to think that we live in a material universe, and we do, but that universe comes out of the mind. We have the expression mind over matter, and it's really true. It's the mind that produces the matter, not the other way around. Our physical universe comes out of the mental universe first. So all is mind, everything is mind. And the extension of that is the universe is mental, right? The universe that we live in, it looks physical, but at its essential nature, it is mental. Why is that so important? Because if you want to make any kind of change, and for me, the following principles, numbers 2 through 7, those are kind of tools that you can use to create change in the mind, to create change in your universe.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're in a way, we are kind of the thoughts of the all, which we could say is God, goddess, however you want to term it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also another really fascinating bit that helped me to understand. It's like if you imagine an artist or a writer, he creates characters, and are they his? They contain a part of him because he created them, but they also take on a kind of external life of their own. And I thought that was a really beautiful way of putting it.
It is. It's a great idea, and it gets into the question of what is real and what level is it real. Even at the idea of the all is mind, our language is a little bit limited to communicate kind of abstract spiritual and philosophical concepts. So the idea of an author creating a character is a great way to illustrate it. For example, you have Romeo and Juliet. Okay, well, Shakespeare's been gone centuries, but Romeo and Juliet, in a way, they still live on. They still live in the mind. They're still on our stages and in our thoughts. So that shows that mental reality does continue. And yes, we are kind of thoughts of the all. And the whole universe is a thought of the all as well, too. And by extension, we can also use our minds to create thoughts and to create changes in our world. And when you realize that the essence is mental, And it's much easier to kind of create changes on a mental level than on a physical level. When you start with the mental level, that's when you can create good changes. So anytime that you want to kind of understand something, a situation, always ask yourself, well, what's the mental thought process? What mental process was behind this to create this situation? And that'll give you a lot of interesting insights on the nature of why something happens.
Yeah, to me, the one thing that did strike me about the Kybalion is it seems quite theoretical. It doesn't, it certainly doesn't give you like exercises or okay, this is how you do this or spells or anything like that. So, how do you use it in your daily life to empower yourself in a sort of spiritual way?
Mm-hmm. It's intentional that there's not a how-to list in the book, and if you read it, it says it's not there to create any kind of new system or doctrine or whatever. The idea is these are principles. It's kind of like tools in a toolbox. For example, I look at the principles. If you have a toolbox, you've got a hammer, you've got a saw, you've got a screwdriver, and with those tools, you can build pretty much anything that you want. And the idea is learn how to use the tools. Okay, I use them in my way. You may use them in your way. But here's kind of a quick way that I look at things. I was talking to someone yesterday, actually, and they were telling me about a problem. And so when I look at the problem, okay, it's a problem with the situation, but I always ask myself, well, what was the mental process that came before that problem? One of the principles is cause and effect. So if the problem is the effect, I ask myself, well, what was behind that? What caused it? And you always want to go back to the mental cause of anything if you want to get to the heart of it. And that's usually the level where you can start to make real changes. Work on the mental level before you try and change the external situation. The second principle that comes after, do you have any doubts about mentalism? Anyone have anything they want to ask?
Well, I would just like to say to live chat. Brandon Young is asking, what are the historical origins of the Kybalion?
Okay, for me, it's a book the Kybalion is a book. It was published about 100 years ago. It was published by the 3 initiates anonymously. Lots of people have been investigating who are the actual authors, or is there only one? Many people speculate that it's William Atkinson. Some people speculate that it's Paul Foster Case. But historically, it's a book that was published about 100 years ago, the Kybalion itself. What it contains are universal principles that go far beyond just 100 years ago.
Great answer. And I'd just like to tell chat, feel free to ask questions at any point during the chat, but if John's halfway through a point, I'll wait until he's finished his point to ask the question, but keep it going, chat. Lovely. Okay, well, we're on the second principle where we're getting into correspondences.
Correspondence. This is probably the most popular principle that people are most familiar with, and it's one of the easier ones. It says, as above, so below. As below, so above. And there's another sentence that people use a lot, as within, so without, as without, so within. And basically, everything comes from the mind. That's the principle of mentalism. Since everything has a mental nature and its essence, that's something that connects everything. Everything's connected by its mental nature. And using correspondence allows you to see how things are connected, see how things work together, and see how you can put things together. How I look at correspondence is, okay, I have an idea in my mind. I want to create something. Okay, this is my intention. This is my mentalism. So for example, okay, I want to get healthier. That's what I have in my mind. Correspondence is a tool that you can use to turn your mind into reality. Okay, so for example, if it's my desire in my mind, I want to improve my health, as above, so below. Using correspondence, I'll use a tool or a technique that will help me bring that into manifestation. You can exercise, you can eat better, Correspondence is really a way of transferring your mind into reality. If you're working in a spiritual practice, you have lots of correspondences. We have correspondences with colors, with symbols. People who work with a ceremonial level, you have lots of traditional correspondences, the metals, the colors, the days of the week, the hours, the planets. These are all examples of correspondence. This corresponds to something else. If I show you a rose, for example, many people say, well, that corresponds to beauty. If I show you a newborn baby or an egg, okay, well, that may correspond with many people to new life or birth. So correspondence is all around us. It's just the principle of correspondence tells us that everything is connected in some way. Everything corresponds in some way. And when you see what the correspondences are, then you have the ability to kind of work with them and use them to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's volumes on just the correspondences alone,
Yes.
like Crowley's 777, for instance, is one.
Oh, yeah.
But the Kybalion, it does seem to come at things from a slightly different perspective. Very interesting book. Next, we have it's vibration, isn't it? The idea that it's not matter, it's now energy, and then when we look at energy, it's just everything is, again, these thoughts of God idea. Could you go into the vibration idea a bit more?
Sure, vibration. Everything moves, everything vibrates, nothing is still, nothing ever stops. And this is something that our, modern science pretty much agrees with. We're getting more and more into the energetic level of things in science rather than the material level of things, kind of the deeper that we go. And really, everything is energy, and energy is a form of vibration. And, I'm trying to come up with a couple of theories about using the Kybalion. And for me, vibration is kind of the consequence of mentalism and correspondence. So take a look at it this way. Okay, you have an idea in your mind. I want to, for example, improve my health. Okay, that's mentalism. And number two, how do I correspond that? Okay, I'm going to eat better and I'm going to exercise more. Mentalism plus correspondence produces a vibration. And this is one way that you can use the principles, as tools. Because if you have a thought in your mind or something that you mentalize and you correspond that with the appropriate actions, you're going to produce a result, a situation or an event, or the easy ways to call that a vibration. That is a way to materialize your mind on a physical level. And you evaluate the vibration, then you see if you like it, if you want to change the vibration of the situation.
So do you use like your key tools would maybe be like meditation to get yourself in a maybe a different or altered state of consciousness? Do you use things like ritual magic at all?
Sure. I mean, and that's where correspondence, like you said, it's a whole book out of itself, because we have an almost unlimited way of corresponding our mind into matter. You can do it through ritual, you can do it through meditation, you can do it through your work. It depends on what you're trying to create, what you're trying to change. I like to keep things simple. I think there are some basic practices that have been around forever, that hopefully will be around forever, and that always work. One way is breathing. I think breathing is something that we do all the time, but how often do we use that consciously and intentionally to create a change, to create a vibration? Another one is meditation, of course, visualization. Literally yesterday, I was talking to a friend, talking about different meditation techniques, and I said one of my favorite meditation techniques, and it's one of the first ones that I learned, was just to sit and stare at a candle flame. I know people try and like to get as elaborate as possible and, visualize the 100-sided sphere or, object. that's great, but you can keep it a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Sometimes the simplest practices are the most efficient. So I do have, my kind of morning practices. I have my before I go to bed practices, and during the day, depends on what I want. I have my daytime practices too, but I tend to keep them simple.
Yeah. You are going to be doing a series of teachings, aren't you? You're starting a YouTube channel of your own.
Yes, getting the whole social media up and running, and we'll be posting different ways, and hopefully this is information that people are looking for, and seeing what people need, answering the questions, and showing how I use it after, a bit of experience working with this material to kind of maybe shorten the path for people who want to understand the same things.
Okay. I've got another question from chat here.
Mhm.
It's from a good friend of mine, Names Policy, and he's saying, is there even a difference between the so-called states of consciousness? It's all choice.
Okay, if I understand the question, is there any difference between states of consciousness? We'll see in a minute. The answer is yes, and the opposite is also true. No,
All
because
truths are
opposites.
half truths.
Exactly. But to give kind of a better explanation for the minute, there's the all, and in the Kybalion, for example, it talks about the kind of three planes of existence, and they divide it into the material plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. But really, it's just all one thing, but it's kind of easier to work with it in, for us. Okay, I'm dealing with the material plane now, I'm dealing with the mental plane now. In essence, it's all the same. So, to answer that person's question, it's just all one state of consciousness. From our perspective, it may be the material plane, or from another perspective, it may be perceived as the spiritual plane, but it's all the same thing.
Yeah, I think that takes us quite nicely onto the next principle, which is polarity, because I think a lot of people are in a state of, like love is the opposite of hate, and that, they do oppose each other, but they
Mhm.
are, most importantly, degrees of the same thing. It's like, where do you find cold on a thermometer?
Mhm.
It's not like this what would you call it? There's a word for that worldview where I think in religion, I think it's like a divided. There's God up there and there's us down here. Could you explain polarity a little bit in the Kybalion sense?
Sure. I mean, relatively speaking, we live in a world of opposites. You have day and night, good and bad, sick and healthy, happy, sad. But if you look at it a little bit deeper, we just talked about vibration. Any of those pairs of opposites, sick or healthy, good or bad, they're all vibrations. And any vibration is really on a spectrum. So, for example, like you said, cold and hot. Okay, it's 100 degrees out. Is that cold or is that hot? Well, 100 degrees compared to 0 degrees, that's pretty cold. But if you look at 100 degrees compared to 500, 100 degrees is not hot at all. So, anytime someone gives an evaluation of something, this is good or this is bad or this is healthy, this is unhealthy, it's always in reference to another point on that spectrum. If I say 100 degrees is hot, because I'm comparing it to that pole where it's cold. So any vibration that you have, you always want to see that vibration on a larger spectrum that has two extremes, from happy to unhappy. And that vibration that you're working is somewhere between those two poles. And the side that you call happy or the side that you call unhappy, those are relative. It depends on your perspective. If you're a parent, you get a kid, you can say, well, that's the right thing to do. And then, the other parent might say, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. They're both looking at the same thing, but from opposite sides. But polarity itself, yes, everything has two poles. Opposites are the same. With a lot of time and years thinking about the Kybalion, I've really been able to kind of focus in on a couple of lines. And last year, my sentence was, all truths are half truths. And anytime someone said something to me, or even I made a decision, okay, this is the right thing to do, but the opposite is also true, right? And when you actually question yourself, it's a little challenging. If it's something bad, oh, this is terrible. Well, no, but the opposite is also true. This is a good thing. It challenges you to really open your perspective. We're so used to seeing things from one degree or one side, but polarity challenges us to see things from both sides. And when you see things from both sides, it gives you a much broader perspective, and it gives you more information that you can use to get a better result or create changes in a situation that you want to change, or to change that vibration that you created. And that's not really how the world kind of looks at things. It's black or white, but I say it's black and white, and really all the shades in between.
Absolutely. I mean, from my personal experience, I don't think it's any secret that something bad just happened and I kind of lost my job. And that seemed like a very bad thing. But now I'm thinking, well, actually, it's given me a lot more spare time, and, I can explore other avenues. And it's actually, you can turn that negative into a positive.
And it's interesting. I was watching a TED video today, and it was about a woman. She lost her leg, and it's, you think that's a tragedy, but pretty much the summary of her video is this is kind of the best thing that had happened to her, because it allowed her, or she used it to allow her to see things from a different way. And that's a real important thing to remember with polarity. You're not limited to see things from one way, right? Because again, everything is mind. You can choose to polarize how you see something. You had a bad situation happen to you. We have kind of the automatic way that we respond to things, the default way. But with polarity, you can polarize how you look at something. And there's always a better way to look at something. And this is very interesting and magical work as well, too, because a lot of people think, well, you can only do it this way, and this is the only way that you can do it. And I say, well, that's a half truth. Right? That's the only way that you can do it from this particular perspective. But there's more than one perspective. We have an infinite number of perspectives. And when you learn how to change your perspective, when you learn how to polarize how you see things, that gives you the ability to be able to say, well, how could this be a good thing? Right? Or how can I do this better? So polarity, we do it all the time, unconsciously. I like something, suddenly I hate it. And we can use polarity consciously as well, too. Well, I don't see this as a good thing now, but let me think about it. How can this actually be good? And as you mentioned, right, you're able to polarize the situation, and the external situation hasn't changed. It's your mind, your internal situation that changes how you see it.
Absolutely. All is mental.
All is mind.
Just an interesting aside, I noticed that they mention a guy called Herbert Spencer, who they believe might have been a reincarnation of Heraclitus. And I looked up Herbert Spencer, and it was actually him that came up with the phrase, the survival of the fittest. It wasn't Darwin, was it?
Oh, really? That's a good one. I'm not sure. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's me just going off bat a little bit. So what is the next principle after polarity?
We have rhythm. In rhythm, it says that everything flows, everything has tides, everything has kind of it's like a pendulum, right? Everything has a pendulum type of swing. Things go 1 degree, then they go to another degree. And rhythm always compensates. You never have a pendulum that goes really up in one direction and then just a little in the other, right? And that shows we have, even in the ocean, we have the ebb and flow of the tides. We have this in nature. We have the seasons change. Everything has kind of a cyclical side to it. The pendulum is always in action. And that's really useful because you can use the pendulum to your advantage. If they say strike when the iron's hot, right? So when things are moving in the positive direction, go for it. Take advantage of that momentum, take advantage of that rhythm to get things done that you want. I guess the problem is, well, what happens when you get the backswing going on? And when things seem to be going backwards, and it's always going to happen. There is something called the law of neutralization, and I use this a lot. I wish I had a pendulum here, but imagine, okay, here's a string, here's a pendulum. So if you're here at the bottom of the pendulum, you're feeling the full force of the pendulum, right? So here it's on the good side, so you want to feel the full force. But when the pendulum is starting to go back on the negative side, you don't want to be down here. If this is the pendulum, the part that moves the most is down here. When the pendulum's going on the bad side, you want to neutralize yourself. You want to go up mentally on that pendulum and stay in the middle where it doesn't move so much. That's one way that you can neutralize rhythm. And people do this automatically. For example, I'm not going to let this get to me. That's one way of neutralizing a bad situation, like you did, right? I'm not going to let this get to me. The pendulum, we can't stop rhythm. It always happens, but we can control how that rhythm affects us, how much we get into it or how much we stay out of it. So everything has rhythms. People have rhythms. Relationships have rhythms. Countries have rhythms. Nature has rhythms. And it's interesting to recognize, and it's important that you can't stop the flow of things. Things always will be swinging back and forth, but you can control how it affects you by neutralizing the negative parts, and you can take advantage of rhythm when things are going in the right direction and using that rhythm and going in the direction of that as well too. The problem is when people try and ignore or deny that rhythm exists, and that's when you suffer a lot.
Yeah. So would you say it's important for us to have some kind of anchoring daily practice? I know myself, especially, I tend to have periods where I'm really hot and I'm practicing every day, and then I have periods where I just lose momentum. So I guess that's just going with my own circadian rhythms in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and a really important thing for everyone is to recognize their own rhythms. Some people, I notice I tend to have like a 2-week rhythm. It seems like after 2 weeks, things will start to change. And then by knowing that that's my kind of personal rhythm, then I can prepare myself, to kind of neutralize or stay away from the bad side. Or if things are getting bad, okay, well, in a couple of weeks, it's going to change. That's my natural rhythm. And then prepare yourself. And like you said, there are lots of different techniques to whatever works for you. I mean, everyone has their own practice, whether it's prayer or whatever kind of practice that you do, ritual or any kind of working. You have to recognize what vibrates best with you. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm here to tell people what tools they can use to apply in their practice. But rhythm is a big one. Recognize your rhythms, recognize the rhythms of situations you're involved in or that you want to change. Try and identify them. And when the rhythm's on the good side, go with it. And when it's going in the backswing, what can you do to kind of minimize the impact or at least kind of neutralize yourself from it? Meditation's a great one. Again, visualization, breathing, all the basics really apply as ways to change vibration and to help you neutralize a rhythm as well too.
Mm-hmm. Do you pay much attention to things like astrology and planetary hours? Maybe the more traditional magical practices?
Yes and no. I paid more attention to planetary hours in the past when I was working with them more. But the moon, it's out there, it's close, it's good not to ignore. The more basic ones are my bigger priorities now, but the more abstract ones, not so much. You know why? Because all truths are half truths. Oh, you must do this during this planetary hour, standing on your left leg, holding your right hand up with a sprig of, rosemary. That's a half truth. I mean, from your perspective, okay, I get it and I respect it, but it's not the only way to look at it, and it's not the only way to do that to get the same results.
Yeah, I have to say, the Kybalion to me seemed refreshingly modern, even though it's based on supposedly the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. I think there is too much of the precise, a grimoire has got to be followed to the letter. So it just seems superstitious and silly, a lot of it, some of the time. And I've said it before on streams. Where do you get a black cat's brain in 2019?
Amazon. Well, in a little bit of defense of that, that group of people, and I in the past was more in that group. I think it's really valid, and I really think it's interesting to, be familiar with that, but don't be limited to it and don't be stuck to it, because you're kind of denying that the universe is mental, right? And that there are other ways to work.
Excellent. We've got a question from Oswald Spengler here. Do you think mindfulness meditation is consistent with Hermetic magic or a corporate New Age scam? Controversial, Oswald.
So, if I understand what he's asking, is the whole mindfulness movement a corporate scam?
Yeah, I think that's it.
I'm going to have to go back to all truths or half truths. I mean, was it created by corporations, the mindfulness thing? Not so much. It's a little bit older. It's a lot bit older than that. I mean, are corporations maybe trying to, get some money out of it? Maybe. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Is it limited to corporations? No. But if that's going to help people get better, fine. I mean, that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed Ethan Ross he's a good friend of mine. So from rhythm, we start to get into cause and effect, don't we? That's the next principle.
Mm-hmm. Cause and effect, that's another one that pretty much science, conventional Western science agrees with. Every cause has an effect. Every effect has a cause. And everything happens according to some kind of principle, some kind of law. We may not always recognize it. The Kybalion talks about there is no such thing as chance. Chance is just a law that's not recognized, a law that's not perceived, or a law that's not understood, right? All that happened by chance. Well, I think we're in an interesting time right now with big data, however you pronounce it. We're having more and more information, and we can see that things are not so random anymore. It seems like the more information you have, the better you are able to see cause and effect, right? When you have a very micro perspective, it's kind of hard to see why things happen. But kind of the more macro perspective that you have, the more obvious things seem, right? Well, this happened, it's cause and effect. And then the problem is we don't always know what we have to look for. What elements do we have to identify? The Kybalion talks about, for example, okay, you throw some dice on the table and the number 7 comes up. Well, is that by chance or is that actually cause and effect? And relatively, people say, oh, it's just chance, but if you look at it, the amount of force that the person threw the dice with, the condition of the table, the humidity in the air, the surface of the die, the intention of the person. Again, the more information that you can include, then you start to see that nothing is really caused by chance. It's just things that we're not recognizing at the moment. Afterwards, we tend to say, oh, now I understand why that happened. Hindsight this age 2020. But cause and effect, really, there's nothing escapes the law. We may not recognize it, but there's only cause and effect, no chance.
I think that's really interesting, because one thing I noticed when I did start formal magical practice was I seemed to be more in control of my own destiny. I wasn't getting so buffeted about by these random things that would happen. And so I think the higher you get, exactly, the more data, the higher perspective you have, the more you can kind of see things developing that you might not have noticed previously. And I also think altering your consciousness can help with this. And I'm a great fan of psilocybin. And when you alter your consciousness to that level, you really do feel at the time like you can see things and everything seems to make sense.
Because, when you're altering your mind, in a way, you're increasing your vibration, and you're kind of expanding yourself and your view and your ability to see on a larger scale, right? Not only on the microscopic scale, like the kind of, normal human scale, but you're seeing through your greater eyes, and in one way, seeing through the eyes of the all. And then when you have all that data, you can kind of look at your life and say, oh, that's why that's happening. That's why that's happening. And that's going to happen pretty soon, because you can see the causes. Right? So expanding your consciousness through psychedelics or through whatever way, breathing or life situations, however you want to do it, if it allows you to see the cause and effect in a way that allows you to produce positive change or to influence that in a way that's beneficial to you, great. I've also talked to people who have kind of expanded their consciousness and locked up, got terrified, curled up in a ball. They didn't like what they saw. So that's because they didn't increase their vibration, right? And they kind of weren't really ready to see all the cause and effect. So, if you're ready for it and you can see it as it really is, great. And that's the intention. Increase your vibration to be able to see more and experience more. And then you can see cause and effect more easily. And I agree with you. The more we work on ourselves, the better we're able to see these principles in our lives, and the better we're able to use them in our lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed in chat someone was asking, do you think, that, like someone was saying, lucky people, you seem to get these people that just seem to have luck. Why do some people have good luck and others have bad luck?
Good luck and bad luck. Good luck and bad luck. Good luck and bad luck is a perspective. Like, again, the video that I saw, this girl, she lost her leg. Most people would say that's bad luck, but that's not how she sees it. So good and bad, that's kind of a relative way of putting it. You can say there's luck. I don't even think there's luck. I just think there are events. There's life, and if you consider it something that's positive, you're going to call that good luck. And if you see it as something negative, you're going to call it bad luck. Now, I think, maybe what the person is talking about, I knew a guy many years ago, and he said, I'm a lucky guy. And I knew him, and I considered him to be a lucky guy in the kind of common sense. And I asked him why. And he said, good things happen to me. And then I asked him, why do good things happen to me? He said, I don't know. I don't care. I don't question it, but I just see these as good things. I thought that was a great answer, because that told me that what was going on in his mind, how he corresponded the things in his life. He corresponded them as positive. You could lose your job, and that could be the best thing that ever happened to you. You could get married to the person of your dreams, and that could be the worst thing that ever happened to you. So it's really all a question of how you decide to label it. And again, that good or bad, it's really relative. I don't think there is good or bad luck. There are just situations, and you decide if it's good or bad. And if it's something that you consider bad, that's a bad vibration, then you want to polarize that vibration. And again, use the principles to help you change your luck.
Yeah. Could you give an example of if someone came to you and said, oh, I'm having this terrible time. My wife's left me. My life's fallen apart. What would you say would be the first thing that person should do?
What's going on in your mind? As within, so without. As above, so below. Right? And more importantly, what's outside you, it's a lot less under your control than what's going on inside you. And a lot of people try and control the external situations, and kind of good luck trying to change someone other than yourself, right? It seems easier to do, but really that's how the person is looking at it, right? Work on yourself, work on your mind, work on what are you corresponding these situations with. And the opposite is also true. So if the opposite is also true, how can you see that situation or that person or that event from a different perspective? And if you can only see it as a bad thing, then you need a little bit more mental flexibility, because you're so used to looking at it in a particular rut. You're looking at a way that isn't helping you. So let's try and look at this from a different situation. And this is when people do come to me. I say, okay, what's going on? Right? I get this situation explained to me. Okay, so what's the mentalism behind this? Okay, if the mentalism isn't so good, what you're imagining, how can we polarize this? How can we change it? And frequently, the external situation doesn't always have to change that much for the person to feel better. And that's what we all want, is to feel better. We think situations sometimes have to change for us to feel better. Not necessarily we have to change in order to feel better.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I was single. This is a very mundane example, but I was single for like 3 years, and for the first 2 years, 6 months of that, I was like, "Oh God, I need a girlfriend. I'm so tired of waking up alone." But then gradually, I started to enjoy life more, and feel better about myself, and think, "Hey, you know what? I'm actually really enjoying being on my own, and I got all my stuff sorted out." And then, mysteriously, my beautiful girlfriend appeared. So it's making the changes within, and I think I think people pick up on this as well. If you're like staring at every good-looking woman that goes by, you're giving off a kind of air of desperation. But when you're self-assured and just think, I don't need anyone, I'm happy, that is an attractive quality. So yeah.
Yes, and that air of desperation is a correspondence to the mentalism. And that mentalism is corresponding into a vibration. And like you said, people pick up on that vibration, right? And then when you have that self-confidence too, that's also a mental condition that you're corresponding in how you look, how you feel, and on a more subtle level, how you vibrate. And we do pick up on this, as much as we like to ignore that, or many people like to ignore that there's intuition or, chemistry. It exists. Everything is vibration. And when you can change your vibration through changing your mind, nothing changed externally for you to feel better, right? You changed the internal, and then that corresponded to an external change. People focus way too much on trying to control the external situations. It's like trying to swim upstream, just go downstream, start in your mind, and that's where it all starts, and let the consequences of that take place. And that's usually an easier way to get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. Sagely advice. Okay, we're moving on to the 7th principle already, and we're at gender. How does gender work in the context of the Kybalion?
7th principle, gender. Gender is everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles, and gender manifests on all planes. Okay. Again, gender is not necessarily male, female. That's kind of a manifestation on the material plane, but we do have mental gender, we have spiritual gender, gender on all levels. I think an easy way that I like to look at it with something that's a bit more familiar is that yin-yang symbol. You get that black and white, and you have the masculine side and the feminine side, and everything has both sides. And the way that I've been looking at this for the past couple of years, it's kind of like a magnet. When you have one of those bar magnets, one side is positive and one side is negative, right? It's the same magnet, but you have those two sides. And it's important to recognize that everything has two sides. Everything has two poles. Everything has two genders. A lot of times when people are looking at a situation, they only look at one side. And you have to realize there's always something else going on, more specifically. Someone says, oh, okay, I want to attract something into my life. Okay. If you're attracting something at the same time, you're also asserting, right? You can never just do one side of gender. You can never only have one pole in action. Where people mistake things a lot is trying to be too extreme on one side. Alpha male comes into mind, I guess. That's not to put them down, but I mean, everything has to be done in balance, or if you negate one side of gender, if you only think there's one side of something, it's both. Jung got into this. You have the anima and the animus. Everyone has both sides in them. And I think, to really not reclaim your power, but to really work with yourself completely, you have to recognize you have both sides. For example, you've got a good side, you've got a bad side, you've got a happy side, you've got an unhappy side, you've got the masculine side, you've got the feminine side. Everything has gender. For me, it's like polarity. Everything has two poles. And gender just kind of specifies the masculine side, which, in traditional correspondences, that's assertion, that's the arrow, that's what goes out, that's kind of the creator. You have the feminine side, that's kind of the yin side, that's the side that attracts, that kind of, circulates and generates, right? But anything that you want to create in your life, you really have to use both of those together. If you only use one, you're kind of ignoring that principle. And gender manifests on all planes. We can have physical babies, gender on a physical level, but we can also engender mental babies. And I think that's really important, and people forget that. It comes down to mental responsibility as well, too. We have to be responsible on a physical level for the creations that we make, but we do need to be responsible on a mental and on a spiritual level as well, too, because we do create things on those planes. And that's where we have to remember that principle of creation, male, female, that gender, applies on all levels. And using that to your ability or to your advantage, you can create on a mental plane. You can engender. And that goes back to mentalism, right? If you want to create something, first you engender it in your mind, then you correspond it, create the vibration, and use the other principles to flesh it out and work it into manifestation to your advantage.
I think that's a very interesting idea. It reminds me of a technique that Aleister Crowley had. Seldom can you get through a conversation about occultism without mentioning Aleister Crowley. But he had this idea where you would deliberately embrace things that were maybe normally repulsive to you or disgusting to you. How do you feel about that one?
Well, okay. Many, many years ago, back in my magical training, I had to do this for each of the senses. And I remember doing this very well with a couple of them. For example, the sense of taste. You had to take something that you really, really like to eat, and for me it was chocolate, and be able to eat it to the point where you felt disgusted by it. And I thought this was impossible, right? And the opposite too. Take something that you don't like, for example, a taste, and eat it into start to like it. The chocolate one, I remember, I'm like, I love chocolate. I used to be a chocoholic. I ate, bars and bars a day. I really overdid it. And I was the last person on the world who would think that chocolate wouldn't be paradise in my mouth, basically. So I said, okay, the mind is stronger than the chocolate, and I want my mind to be stronger than the chocolate, so let's do this. Put the chocolate in my mouth, tasted great, and then I started to see, well, the opposite is also true. How is this not the greatest thing in the world? And the interesting thing is, as I was chewing it and kind of, moving it around in my mouth, it started to feel kind of filmy, and I felt that it kind of coated my mouth, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't so good. And then I kind of felt the sugar in my throat, and I was able to polarize, to realize that, well, it's not necessarily the best thing in the world. I decided it was the best thing in the world for me, but chocolate is neither good or bad. Chocolate is chocolate. And that's a magical exercise. I did that with hearing, a song that I hated that my neighbor played all the time. I was able to step back and say, well, if I liked the song, what would I like? And then I started to appreciate it more. And I think this is a great exercise to do for anyone to do on a magical path or in a non-magical path, because it gives you power over things, and it takes away the power that things have over you, right? I get irritated every time I get in the car, right? That's your decision, right? I used to hate cooking, right? And I had a friend said, John, you could burn water. That's how bad I was. And this was years ago. And now cooking gives me immense pleasure because I decided I'm going to polarize that, right? Because I got to deal with it for the rest of my life. So I might as well enjoy it. So these kind of exercises, taking something that you like and seeing it from the opposite perspective, I'm a big fan of it. It's not so easy, but it's very valuable. And that allows you to change your perspective, like we talked about back in Polarity, because nothing is good or bad. It's how you decide it. Right? Chocolate can be good, chocolate can be bad. And if you can perceive it as good and bad and everything else, then you've really dominated yourself and dominated your mind.
Yeah. Just a little random question from chat. How do you feel about panpsychism? I presume you've heard of it.
Can you give me a definition?
Panpsychism, isn't it that they think everything is like, what is panpsychism? Who asked that question? It was, let me see, I think it was Oswald again. Well, we'll talk about something else so we can. Could you define that question a bit more? Because I can't remember what. I think it's that guy. Oh, I can't remember. So, where should we go from here? I'm looking at my. I thought it was interesting that, in the magical sense, you can have like a Satori experience, like that, expanding your consciousness with like mushrooms or something, and then you'd suddenly run out and say, I am God because I've seen everything. And the Kybalion said something very interesting. It's like, that's like one of Dickens's characters or Shakespeare's characters running out and saying, I am Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
It's that idea of half truths.
Exactly. All truths are half truths. I mean, I can pull out a piece of my hair and yeah, it's me, but from one perspective, yes, it's got my DNA, et cetera, came out of my body. But from another perspective, it's not going to do what I'm going to do. So, it is and it isn't at the same time. And that's where a lot of people get in trouble, where they think, oh, I'm God. And they forget that, tomorrow they got to go to work. I mean, it's a half truth. Yes, you are, but you're still human as long as you're in this body. Don't jump off the roof and think you can fly, because you're going to be really let down hard. And then you realize that you're God, but you're not God in its absolute form. You're still human too. You have the God part in you, right? And that's good to cultivate the divinity within you. But we're still a bag of bones and flesh as long as we're in this body.
I've had clarification on the panpsychism. It's the doctrine or belief that everything material, however small, has an element of individual consciousness.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Seems sensible to me too.
Mm-hmm. But just one thing, I would say that doesn't have necessarily human consciousness. And we tend to think of consciousness mainly from our human perspective. Right? There are many, many degrees and many types of consciousness. So, but I agree, sure, everything has consciousness because everything comes from the all, which is living spirit, is consciousness.
The bit that I found did get a little bit complex with the Kybalion was when they started breaking it down into planes, and I think they had like, there's 7.
Yes.
Yeah, could you kind of untangle that for us a little bit?
I would say a little bit at the most, yes. I even tried making kind of a chart that the Kybalion gets into. They say, well, each, you have 3 great planes. It's all one, but it's like we have a day, but it's easier to divide it into day and night just to talk about it, right? There's the universe, there's reality, but you have the mental plane, the material plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. And each of those planes in the Kybalion can be divided into kind of 7 subplanes, like the 7 planes of material worlds. It's like gas, and there are some examples in the Kybalion. And you can, I guess, divide things down as much as you like. But I like to keep things simple. You've got material, kind of the material part of reality. You've got the mental part of reality. You've got the spiritual part of reality. each one of those areas are huge. And yes, you can subdivide them probably as much as you want. The Kybalion does it kind of into 7 groups of each one. The material plane, it gives a pretty good explanation. The mental plane a little bit less, and the spiritual plane even less, because there are things that we don't really talk about in our normal lives, and we're not so used to dealing with the spiritual on that specific of a degree. That's something, you know, I will be getting a little bit into, but I think just to keep it simple, you can break things down as much as you want or as much as you need to. And the Kybalion talks about 7 subdivisions of each plane.
Yeah. How do this is maybe not even relating specifically to the Kybalion, but I'm very interested in non-human intelligences and entities and stuff like that. Have you ever had experience of these phenomena, and what do you make of them?
Well, it's interesting, and let's try and give a simple explanation. If the all is mind, and mind is spirit, it's living energy, everything has consciousness. I mean, you know, plants have consciousness. What's that book that came out, I think in the 1950s, The Secret Life of Plants, right? So, you know, and that even gets into the panpsychism. Everything has consciousness. So, you know, we have such a kind of a limited and a restricted way of dealing with reality. It's just what we see in our day-to-day life, and we kind of ignore the rest, because if we perceived everything that was going on around us, would probably go a little bit crazy. I mean, we have to filter a lot of things out, but just because we filter them out doesn't mean they don't exist. And like you mentioned, when you get into altered states of consciousness, you kind of remove those filters. And
Exactly.
by theory, if you remove all the filters, then you'll see that, yeah, it's all consciousness, and it's all alive, and it's all us in a way, right? Because we are in the mind of the all. And we all come from that same source, so that does connect all of us together. So all of these different things, the all is infinite living mind or spirit. So yeah, there is consciousness and spirit in everything. Not only human, and maybe not the way that we understand it, but yeah, it makes total sense to me that everything, and that there would be energies and beings, as you said, in everything, from the plant to the deity to, you know, the webcam to everything. Right?
Yeah. I'd previously, I've kind of switched again. I'm a bit of a dabbler, a bit of a dilettante, but I had been researching like Renaissance magic and stuff, and they had this idea of the chain of being, which stretched from the tiniest humble rock and lichen up to Godhead itself. And I see echoes of that in the Kybalion as well, you know, with this thing of all. And could you talk a little bit more about the all? Because that's what that's the most fascinating bit for me, was this concept of the all.
Sure. The all, you could also call it spirit or infinite living mind or the universal mind. I guess the vocabulary, the word's not so important, but it's everything that is, right? And we're not so used to thinking about, you know, such a large scale, but to understand the all in these little brains that we have on its, you know, to render the veil, I think, you know, who am I or who are we to say that we're that advanced where we can understand the deeper secrets? But we can learn a couple of things about it indirectly. And a couple of the understandings of the all is that the all is everything that is, because there's the all, there's everything, and there's nothing else. So the all is all. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere. There's no space, physical or non-physical, where the all isn't. Another concept is that the all is eternal. It always has been. It's never started because there would be something to start it. It always has been. It always is. So it's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's been around everywhere. And it's also unchanging, because if it changed, that would mean there would be some agent that would cause it to change, right? So the all is unchanging, and that for me was a little bit tricky. But the all is, and the verb to be is. It is all the time. It's never not. That makes sense. And what else about the all?
It's a deep one.
It's a deep one, yes, because you can go in a lot of different directions.
You know that one of the most profound philosophical, spiritual questions I've ever had was how can something come from nothing? So, how did all this? I mean, I don't expect you to answer it, but how could something come from nothing? How did this material universe ever come into being? It's. I mean, nobody's ever going to answer it. But what do you think about that?
Okay, it's an interesting question, and there's some information in the Kybalion, for example, that gives a little bit of information on it, and it talks about how are things created, right? And for example, another part of the all is that the all can never be subtracted from or added to, right? Because it's all, it can never be less or more. So then how did the universe get created, right? Did you take a little piece of the all and then create the universe? That's, a common thought. There are a couple ways that we can create. For example, we talked about gender, right? You can create something. You can create a child through, part of yourself, right? That's one way that things are created. You take a little bit of yourself and externalize, and then you have a person, for example, or an animal or another plant, right? Another way that you can create is take external things and put them together, right? Get some wood, get a couple of nails, you can create a house. That's another way that you can create something external. Another way that we create is mentally, right? It's interesting. Reading the all, I asked myself once, imagine if we had limited thoughts. Imagine if you could only think 100 thoughts a day. I mean, we have a limit to how much we can do physically, but it's interesting. Our minds are unlimited. And I think that's really relevant and corresponds to the mind of the all. It's absolutely unlimited. And we can think our personal universe into existence, and we never run out. We never run out of mind. We can never run out of thoughts. It's not, oh, I thought my 250 thoughts today, I can't think of any more. It's unlimited. Thank goodness, right? And in terms of the universe being created, that's kind of one of the ways that it's explained. The all kind of thought it into existence. And, we are the consequences in the universe as well, too. But it's really hard to think on kind of an unlimited mental scale. We can think on our human scale, but on the mind of the all, it's right. I don't promise to understand it all. I've been on the path for a long time, and I think I have more questions than answers at this point. But the idea is that, back to the beginning of our talk, the material world is a consequence of the mental world, and the mental world is unlimited. So when you have an unlimited supply, right, you can create the mental world and anything else as well, too.
Yeah, everything has to start with thought, doesn't it? I mean, before you can create anything, you have to have the idea, even I want to paint. Everything is mental. I've got an interesting question from Names Policy. How would you, John, relate the all to, I don't know if you know much about Zen, but to the Zen concept of the world? I don't know much about Zen, so I'll leave that one to you.
Okay. Not necessarily knowing what the person defines as the Zen concept of the world, what I can say is that, the all, or the principles, the all is mine, everything starts from the all. I guess it would be a question of where that person thinks the Zen world starts, right? I mean, I'm not going to do a kind of a back and forth thing, but what I'll say is this: the all created everything, or the concept, the mind, the universal mind creates everything. And I would say, as a result, also creates the Zen concept as well, too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to the person, but if they want to write more, I'll answer it. But that's
Try and keep your questions nice and precise. I've got another one from Prospero. Are you a Kabbalist? at all? And how does the Kabbalistic worldview relate to the Kybalion, if it does indeed?
It's so funny when people ask questions, are you this, are you that? And I'll have to say all truths are half truths. Any answer that you get, we seem to have to define everything so much today because everyone, definitions have gone out the wayside and everyone has their own definition. What is a Kabbalist, right? So that's where I get a little bit nervous in this kind of thing. But have I studied the Kabbalah? Yes. Have I worked with it? Yes, quite a bit. More in the past than today. But is there a connection between the Kabbalah and the Kybalion? A lot of people confuse the words, and a lot of people think the Kybalion is about the Kabbalah. But going back to the same idea with the Zen, the Kybalion is a book, right? But the principles that are contained in there, these 7, those are at the basis of everything. So yeah, you'll see that you can use all of this in the Kabbalah as well too. I mean, I learned about the Kybalion before the Kabbalah, many years before the Kabbalah, and it helped me a lot in doing the Tree of Life and doing a lot of the workings. So, I mean, it fits in kind of more as a basin in the background rather than, specific Kabbalistic practice, going up one of the paths, for example. So it's kind of at the basis of everything, including the Kabbalah. It's just a little bit, I like to say it's so invisible that it's under our noses. I mean, we have the expression, it's all in your mind, and that's a lot more revealing than we tend to realize. It is all in your mind. The Kabbalah, in a way, it's all in your mind as well too. And what's not in your mind, what's external, is in the universal mind. So you can, understanding the principles, it will help you with your Kabbalah work, definitely, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it reminds me of a book that Don Milo Duquette wrote. It's all in your mind. You just have no idea how big your mind is.
Yes.
Yeah. I think another interesting point is this big battle that seems to be going in modern magic about the psychological model, which says that it is literally everything is in your own mind and nothing kind of exists outside that. And then you've got the spirit model guys that say, no, these are the entities that magicians deal with are absolutely objective and real. They come from a different place, another dimension, perhaps. What are your views on that sort of tension between those two models?
Not to sound repetitive, but all truths are half truths. And so then I guess these people are saying it can only be one or the other and not both and more.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely both. I think because I believe in a fractal universe that somehow we have got the divine spark in us. These entities are half in us and half out us. You know what I mean? They come from within and without. So I would have to agree both.
And in the end, this is me, right? And how I look at things. In the end, I think it's really about, we do things for results, right? So, does it matter? Well, relatively it does. Absolutely it doesn't. If you want to look at it as, I remember I was looking at, years and years ago about the idea of incorporation. Well, is it that something comes outside of you and it goes into you? Or is it that, you repress every single aspect of yourself, but that aspect, and you allow it to come out? It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They're interesting questions, but I really try and focus a little bit more on the results. Well, with whichever perspective I have, is it going to produce or is it going to help me in my goal, right? They say all roads lead to Rome. So, choose the road that gives you the most happiness, really.
Yeah.
As long as you get there.
Absolutely. Okay, the Kybalion was first published in Chicago, the New Thought being very active there at the time. Do you know why Chicago? Why Chicago? Why not?
There you go.
Yeah. I noticed a couple of guys earlier were talking about like John Dee and Crowley and that. What are your feelings on apart from the Kybalion, who are your sort of main influences or interests in the occult world? The larger sort of whole occult deal. Is there anyone you love? Is there anyone you don't love? Do you love Blavatsky more than Crowley, or do you think Dee was a madman, or
I've read a lot. I'm familiar with most of them. I'm not actively so much in the ceremonial practice today, the path. I respect all of them. I think all of them have valid points. I think all of them have, faults as well too. I like what you said, how can you have a talk about occultism not mentioning Crowley? You can't, or at least, in this century. But I think they all have valid points. I think they were all human as well too. I really get cautious about putting any one person on too much of a pedestal. I think everything you need to filter, and the filter that I use is the principles, right? So if someone says, oh, well, this is true, and if that person says this is absolutely true, period, stop, full point, don't ask me any questions, I say, no, because that person forgets that all truths are half truths. So, rather than saying specific names, I think if that person produces work and I see these principles, that they respect them and directly or indirectly incorporate them into the work, then it gets a thumbs up from me. And Blavatsky gets a thumbs up. She's had some problems. I mean, all of them have. We're all human. Everyone kind of is looking for the same way, and they're all presenting what worked for them. And that's, again, getting back into the idea it has to be done this way and no other way. I try and be a little bit more, trust myself and trust in my own ability to discover things. Learn from the experts, but don't be limited by them, right? And recognize that experts will, and the masters, whatever you want to call them, will communicate what worked for them at that place, at that time, with what they had available, like the cat brain, right? But that doesn't mean that in another context, in another world, in another reality, that's the only way that it can be done. But, I definitely respect all the people and the organizations that have gone through much harder times than we are today to do this work and to get the work out. And I'm really glad that we've preserved a lot of this work. And hopefully this generation and you and I and all the listeners, we can add to that. Right? And again, for me, my litmus test for anyone's work is pretty much, does it wash? Does it coincide with Kybalion? And if it passes that test for me, it's great. It may not be for me, but at least, I agree. It's, I give it the thumbs up. And most of them I do.
Yeah. Something I got from the Kybalion, I mean, it's only I've gone through it on audio book and I've read it through the idea of evolution, the idea that we are constantly evolving, so when we die, do you think that we automatically go to like a next stage of being, like a higher state of being, or does it depend on what we've done? Like the idea of if you've had a good life, you go to a better vibration, or if we've had a bad life, we go to a lower place. What are your feelings on that?
That's another tricky one. Okay. Over the years, I've had really a lot of kind of problems with reincarnation, because reincarnation involves the concept of time, and it involves the concept of linear time, past, present, future, right? And time is kind of a human construct. I mean, we use it, again, to kind of separate things, just like day and night, right? It's a convenience that we use. I don't know if externally it exists. So if there's no time, how can there be a past life, and how can there be a reincarnation in the future too, right? So I've always scratched my head at that. If you look at the perspective that there's only here and now, then it changes the game a little bit. Then it's a question of, where are you focused, right? And believe it or not, last night, talking about reincarnation, I was talking to a friend, a psychologist, and saying, well, you need to go back to, find why people have problems. You need to go back to their childhood. I said, well, but if you involve reincarnation, then how far back do you go?
Exactly. How far back is back?
Exactly. And well, what if it's in a pre-human form and the person was a tree way back when, right? So, those three questions, where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? Where I came from, for me, I was more curious about it in the past, not so interested about it today because it's done. You know, where I'm going, I'll deal with that when I get there. And the present, why am I here? That's what we're all, I guess, trying to answer. But the question that I added in my life, and I guess the reason why I'm here as well too, is the question that I was like, how does it all work? Now that I'm here and I'm trying to figure it out, well, what are the mechanisms? What are the rules? Uh, do I think that we die and that's it? No, that doesn't make sense, right? Consciousness, right? Our eternal self, there are many, many explanations. I don't, pretend to have the right one or the only one. I mean, we'll find out when we get there, I guess is what I'd say. And I tend to think it's going to be a better thing more than a worse thing. I'm not so worried about fire and brimstone at all.
No, I certainly don't believe in that. And I think that was a good thing that the Kybalion says is, and it echoes in Kabbalism and many other mystical systems, that it really is not much point in trying to speculate on the theology and on this anthropomorphic God. That's a very important thing. I really think we do have to. I think people spend I mean, look at the trouble that this has caused. That these group have a definition of God, and their God says that you're not allowed to do that, and this group says, yeah, we're allowed to do that, and it just causes misery.
You can choose to be right, or you can choose to be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. I think I'll have to write that down. So I think we've thrown some hard questions at you there, man. Anything you'd like to say before we just kind of sum up? And I'll ask the audience if they've got any last questions.
Yeah, what I'd like to say is if you haven't heard of this, the book, there are some things that you need to filter. Again, I focus specific on the principles. There's some stuff in the book that you got to separate the wheat from the chaff, like anything else. I would definitely give it some time. I've recommended this book to people over the decades, and I tend to get three responses. One, no, I didn't read it. Two, I thought it was written in a really kind of hard style, because it's written 100 years ago, So it was written 100 years ago. The Bible was written 100 years ago. The grimoires were written centuries ago. The Bible more than 100 years ago. The grimoires, but deal with it. Have a little patience. It's a little book, maybe 100 pages. So, just because it's not in the modern language of, 2000, whatever, don't let that put you off, right? Really, it's worth it. And number two, if you read it and kind of brushed it off and didn't see any value in it, take a second look at it. Again, stuff you need to separate, but take a look at the principles, right? Spend a little bit of time with them. Science, cause and effect kind of agrees with that, vibration. But again, the first one, mind, take a moment to use your mind to reflect on that. Try and go a little bit deeper. Don't be offended because it says Hermetic and it's not actually one of the Hermetic books. I have a jar that's hermetically closed, but it's just a word, right? Don't overwork yourself because it's not part of the body of Hermetic work. It isn't. But is it helpful in going through the body of Hermetic work? Of course it is, right? And if you read it once, I recommend read it again and again and again. I see it in lots of forums online. Oh, I finished reading the Kybalion. What do you recommend next? And I always say, read it again, read it again. Because, I've read a lot over the years, but the only book and the only material that I've found worth my time after all these years is this one. So if that's any insight and if what I've said has helped at all, then it's definitely worth an extra look and for a long, long time.
I certainly think so. I had kind of dismissed it because I'd heard from people, oh, it's not authentic and blah blah blah. It's new thought, and who cares if it works? I'm absolutely, and I loved it actually. I've learned a lot. My dear friend Prospero is saying, all thanks to you. I think everybody's really enjoyed it tonight. Where can we find you online? Like your webpage, your YouTube channel, which I believe you're just getting off the ground. Where can people get a
Sure.
hold of you?
Okay, sure. I'm building up a site right now. It's just a basic page. It's hermeticprinciples.com. I will be creating a free video series explaining the principles, a little bit more detailed than this. So if you want to head over to hermeticprinciples.com, drop in your email, and when the video series is ready, I'll send it to you. I do have a Twitter, actually, where you and I got acquainted, and that is, I can't believe it, I'm pretty sure it's Hermetic Principles. But the main one is hermeticprinciples.com, and on Twitter, I'm drawing a blank.
I think it's Herm Prince.
Oh yes, it's
Yeah,
hermprincom, because I couldn't have the username hermeticprinciples.com, but it's hermprincom. It's an abbreviation. Yes, on Twitter it's at hermprincom. Facebook and all that, I'm getting all the social media together. My Instagram, my tag is Kybalion. It's on private right now because I haven't really done anything with it, but I will, when I have the YouTube channel set up, which hopefully will be very soon. I'd actually like to put this video over there as the first video. Then I'll have all the links on there as well too. But the main one for right now, hermeticprinciples.com or at hermprincom on Twitter.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being the first guest on my new vibed up Saroth the Mage experiment. And I think that's important to stress as well. I'm not a traditionalist in any sense. It is all an experiment for me. And I think you've contributed to that experiment beautifully. So thank you. If no one's got any more questions, I think we can call it a night. And thank you very much, dear friend. And I'll keep in touch, and I'll have to work out. I will paste your links and stuff into the video once I get advice from my technical assistant. He's not an assistant, Davey. He's my friend, but he's going to help me with all that stuff because I'm rubbish at it too. But thank you very much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for introducing me to the Kybalion. It's opened my mind, and that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes, and thank you as well for the opportunity and for all the great questions and for all the people listening still. I appreciate it. And, I've been going at this for a long time, kind of with myself, and I'm seeing more and more how it can help other people. And so now you'll be seeing more of me as well too. And feel free to send me a message on Twitter. And as I get more in social media, I'm very happy to talk about this. I don't have all the answers. I do like to focus on the principles itself. Again, some of these questions, are related to other things, but I'll always try and, focus it right back on what the principles talk about and how you can use those in your practice. And I think we all want the same thing. I think we all want to be happy, right? To become better people, to have better self-knowledge. There's an expression, the truth is one, the paths are many. And I really, really believe that. I try and respect all paths, as long as the path respects me as well, too. So, if you want to be traditional, if you want to work in a very specific way, great, as long as that gets you to where you're going. But I will challenge you to consider these Hermetic principles in your work and see if they can help you get there, maybe faster and better. So, thank you. Thank everyone else as well, too. I had a great time as well, too, and I hope to see you again.
Thanks very much, John. It was brilliant. So thank you, guys. I'll traditionally gong out a few people that I see in chat. So we've got Dark Truth, CC, thank you for coming. Never seen you before. Ronnie G. We've got Names Policy. We've got Patima Condolini. We've got Beam Me Up, Mr. Scott. Thank you for the new sub, I see. We've got Lisa F. Prospero, of course, Davey. We're going to another show called The Sunday Night Show, which is brilliant. Modwiz125, lovely to see you, man. Oswald, I know you were here earlier on. I could go on forever. There's been lots of lovely night. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to end on that. good night, and peace out, all you lovely people. Ciao for now. Bye bye.